Styner, Doctor of Medicine. Tonight's story has the title, The Good Samaritan.
Guardian of birth, healer of the sick, comforter of the aged. And the qualities of the worthy physician are three: the eye of an eagle, the heart of a lion, the hand of a woman.
Our actual case history tonight concerns the field of medical jurisprudence. The object in point, a summons. The case in point, Maud Parrish. She's 46 years old, a housewife. For most of her adult life, she's lived quietly, submissively. She never complained, never rebelled, seldom asserted herself. For Maud Parrish, life was little more than a dull succession of days, a kind of monotony that somehow had to be tolerated. To her, it became a way of life. Then suddenly, unwillingly, she found herself the central figure in a situation of high drama. For the first time in her life, her words became important to others. But when they were needed most, those words would not come.
How long was your wife in this coma, Mr. Parrish?
Well, it was late Tuesday afternoon when I found her unconscious, and, oh, she didn't come around till sometime Thursday morning. Must have been 36, 40 hours, I guess.
Mr. Parrish, would you say that in the interval between your registering at the hotel and the time you found your wife unconscious, would you say that during that interval she appeared ill or under the weather?
Well, I wasn't really sure at first. It's kind of hard to tell, especially with Maud. She's the quiet type, you know, closed mouth, never has too much to say. Sure as shooting, mister, I could tell she was acting kind of funny. Just wasn't herself. I knew something was wrong. Anybody could have seen that, especially a doctor or somebody like that. I knew there was something wrong right away. Any doctor should have known that.
Objection, Your Honor. The statement's a conclusion of the witness. I move to strike saying.
Sustained. Motion granted. The jury will disregard the last statement of the witness.
Thanks, Mr. Parrish. No further questions. Your witness.
Mr. Parrish, exactly how fast were you driving your car when you ran into the ditch? Do you have any idea?
Well, maybe 40, 50 miles an hour, something like that. That ice can be pretty tricky,
You
know.
received no injuries at all as a result of this accident?
No. No, sir, but then I saw it coming. Maud was sleeping. She sleeps a lot in the car. Crashed through her up against the dashboard. She hit her pretty hard, as I recall. Anyway, it was enough to give her a pretty nasty cut on her head.
But can you definitely state that the impact of the crash knocked her unconscious? I'm aware that you have inferred it, but are you positive about it, Mr. Parrish?
Well, she wasn't completely blacked out.
Mr. Parrish, isn't it true that at the scene of the accident, you insisted that your wife was all right? Isn't it true that you were so anxious to continue your trip that you refused to allow your wife to be examined more thoroughly?
No, I don't remember saying or insisting on anything like that.
Isn't it true, Mr. Parrish, that you were running behind schedule? You were afraid you'd be late to register for the convention you were planning to attend?
No, I don't think you could say that. I still had a couple of hours left. And after all, that doctor said Maud was okay. I trusted him. I took his word for it.
But nevertheless, you were in a hurry to get on your way, weren't you not?
Well, if Maud was okay, I didn't see any reason for standing along the road there all day. After all, I had some business cooking at the convention.
After your car skidded off the road into the ditch, how long would you say it was before Dr. Styner arrived on the scene?
Oh, a few minutes, I suppose. I guess he was right behind us.
Mm-hmm. Was your wife particularly dazed or dizzy when the doctor arrived?
Well, of course she was. She was still shook up when we got to the hotel.
Ah. But to begin with, she was not in any particular great pain.
Well, I guess not, but that doctor said...
I'm not interested in what the doctor said, Mr. Parrish. Please answer the question.
All right, there wasn't any particular great pain like you say. But just you turn around and look at her. There's the answer. That Dr. Styner looked at her and he said she was all right, and that's what we went by. It's his fault. He did it. It's all Steiner's fault.
The doctor occupies no privileged position in the eyes of the law. In the treatment of a patient, a doctor of medicine bears certain responsibilities. Legally, such treatment requires the physician to possess the ordinary knowledge of his profession and to exercise ordinary skill. Failure to do so renders him liable to charges of malpractice, and malpractice is the point in dispute in this court of law.
Now, Mr. Parrish, you say the convention lasted for 3 days. You spend most of your time in committee meetings, making contact with business friends, and so forth.
That's right.
Well, what was Mrs. Parrish doing at this time? How did she busy herself?
Well, she stayed in her hotel room, naturally. There wasn't nothing for her to do at the convention.
You mean that your wife stayed in your hotel room for 3 days, and never at any time did she leave that room?
Not as far as I know. Why would she leave, anyway? Where would she go? Besides, she didn't have any money.
Thank you, Mr. Parrish. No more questions, Your Honor.
You may step down.
Your Honor, I would like to call the plaintiff, Mrs. Maud Parrish.
Whatever the dispute in this case, there was no dispute whatever on at least one point. Mrs. Parrish was suffering from partial hemiplegia, a weakness of the extremities on the left side. Symptomatically, there was every evidence that the condition was caused by damage to certain brain cells. Her very appearance was the best testimony she could give. The stiff leg, the trembling muscles, the bent arm, the rigid fingers. In addition, she displayed evidence of amnesia.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
And how long were you and Mr. Parrish married?
29 years.
Do you have any children?
Not anymore.
Oh, I see. Mrs. Parrish, will you tell the jury in your own words what you remember of the accident?
Well, I'm always falling asleep in the car. I remember Richard yelling and the car bouncing. I was thrown forward and hit my head. Everything happened so fast, I just can't seem to get it all straight in my mind. I don't remember getting out of the car, but I was out. And then, this man, I didn't know he was a doctor then, but he was very nice. He put something on my forehead that stung. Iodine, I suppose. And he flashed a light in my eyes. He was very polite.
Did he ask you any questions?
Yes. He asked me if my head hurt.
After he flashed the light in your eyes, did Dr. Styner do anything else?
I don't know.
Did he take your pulse?
I'm sorry. I just can't remember.
Do you remember leaving the scene of the accident?
No, sir.
Do you remember checking into the hotel?
No.
What's the next thing you remember clearly?
In the hospital. I remember waking up in bed, and I didn't know where I was. Richard, my husband, was there, and that nice young Dr. Batten. And something was wrong with my left arm and leg.
Has your condition improved since then?
No. And the doctors say it probably never will.
Mrs. Parrish, would you mind stepping down and showing the jury the extent of your injuries?
Yes, sir.
Can you raise your right arm?
Yes, sir.
Would you do so, please? Will you try raising your left arm?
That's as far as I can raise it.
Mrs. Parrish, I don't want to tax you, but would you try shaking hands with me with your left hand?
I'm sorry. I can't do it.
Objection, Your Honor. The plaintiff's attorney is obviously attempting to arouse the sympathy of the jury. The alleged injuries can be described without this exhibition.
May it please the court, I'm merely trying to demonstrate graphically the extent of my client's injuries.
You are well within your rights, Mr. Phillips. Objection overruled. However, I would suggest that Mrs. Parrish return to the witness stand.
Mrs. Parrish, will you tell us, how long were you in the hospital?
Altogether, a little more than 4 weeks.
Are you still under a doctor's care?
Yes, sir, I am.
Your witness, Counselor.
Mrs. Parrish, you say you don't actually remember very much about your auto accident.
No, sir, I don't.
Well, then you don't, for a fact, know exactly what sort of treatment you received at the scene of the accident.
No, I don't. But my husband told me what happened. That's all I know about it.
Well, Mr. Parrish has testified that a few moments after the crash, Dr. Styner stopped and offered his services. In other words, he voluntarily stopped to see if he could do anything for you.
Yes, I guess he did. I know it looks ungrateful. I mean to repay good intentions this way. But I am paralyzed. And if someone is responsible for it, well, whoever it is, I think he should pay.
Mrs. Parrish, is it not a fact that Dr. Styner asked you to come to his office for further examination?
I'm sorry. If he did, I don't remember it.
Is it not a fact that Dr. Styner strongly advised you to check with the physician as soon as you reached your destination?
I'm sorry, sir. I just can't remember if he did or not.
Your husband never mentioned anything to that effect?
Richard never said anything like that at all. I don't remember myself, but I believe him.
You'll take his word for it?
Yes.
Would you take his word for everything?
Objection. Counsel's inference is completely immaterial and does not tend to prove or disprove any issue involved in this case.
Sustained. Mr. Stroman, please restrict your cross-examination to the more material issues.
Very well, Your Honor. Mrs. Parrish, whose idea was it to file this suit?
Why? Well, ours, I guess. Both of us.
Your Honor, I seriously doubt if the defense counsel's questions have anything to do with the mentioned facts in this case.
Would you mind telling the court what you're trying to prove?
Not at all, Your Honor. Naturally, the apparent amnesia, the witness, has made her testimony somewhat inconclusive. But she seems a strangely reluctant witness, even a reluctant plaintiff. I want to find out why.
I think we may safely assume Mrs. Parrish knows what she's doing, since she saw fit to bring suit in the first place. Kindly confine your questions to more specific matters, Mr. Stroman.
Very well, Your Honor. No further questions, Mrs. Parrish.
After a brief recess called by the court, the next witness for the plaintiff was Homer Batten, M.D., the house physician at the hotel where Mr. and Mrs. Parrish had been staying. The same doctor who attended Mrs. Parrish when she first went into coma.
You heard Mr. Parrish's testimony about the accident.
Yes.
Is it your opinion that Dr. Steiner's treatment of the patient at the time was both adequate and proper?
Objection, Your Honor. Calls for a conclusion of the witness. Dr. Batten was not on the scene. He has no way of knowing exactly what Dr. Steiner's treatment was or the condition of the patient at that time.
Sustained.
Let me put it to you this way, Doctor. Assuming the conditions to be as Mr. Parrish described them in his testimony, what would you have done as a physician under the same circumstances?
Well, I would have examined the patient as best I could under the circumstances, given her any first aid possible, and then I would have recommended that she either be driven to her home and her family doctor called or taken to a hospital for observation and examination.
Thank you, Doctor. Your witness.
Dr. Batten, as I understand it, your patient seemed relatively normal for 36 hours following the accident. Is that true?
It's my understanding that, with the exception of a mild amnesia, the patient appeared normal.
Would you say that her amnesia was a result of the head injury?
It could be, but not necessarily. It could very well have been an emotional reaction brought on by the stress of the accident.
But suddenly, 36 hours later, she allegedly went into a coma. Isn't that rather unusual?
Yes, it is unusual, but it can happen. In this case, it did happen.
Franklin McCall, M.D., an outstanding neurosurgeon, was summoned by the court as an expert witness to evaluate the plaintiff's injury.
A rupture of a number of small blood vessels in the substance of the brain itself, inside the cerebrum. This causes a hemorrhage, but not necessarily at time of injury. The blood might seep out through the ruptures rather than flow. The compressive force of the blood presses upon the brain. What we have here is an evident instance of hematoma within the brain substance involving motor pathways to the left arm and to a lesser degree the left leg. It is my opinion that while there may be some small degree of improvement in the future, most of the damage will be permanent. I do not believe that the impairment can be corrected by surgery.
Dr. McCall, in your opinion, what is the cause of the patient's disability?
The hemorrhage was brought on by a sharp blow to the skull, which ruptured a number of small blood vessels in the brain.
Thank you. You may step down. This court will adjourn till 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
When the court reconvened the following morning, the plaintiff's counsel rested his case. Counsel for the defense called the defendant to the stand.
Your name, please?
Konrad Styner.
Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Your name?
Konrad Styner.
Occupation?
I'm a doctor of medicine, licensed to practice in this state.
How long have you been practicing medicine?
16 years.
Well, Dr. Styner, would you give us a few details of your medical training and professional affiliation?
Your Honor, in the interest of saving the court's time, I'll stipulate that the doctor has had a successful career as a physician and has enjoyed a good reputation.
Thank you. Now that that point's been conceded, let's get to the day of the accident. What happened?
Well, I was on my way home returning from a call, and I rounded a turn and saw this car laying almost on its side in the ditch. The accident couldn't have happened more than a few moments before I got there, and I stopped to see if anyone needed help.
What did you find?
Both Mr. and Mrs. Parrish were outside the car. Mr. Parrish was examining the front end. Apparently there was some minor damage there. And Mrs. Parrish was leaning against the rear fender.
Did she appear to be injured?
Well, she had a slight cut on her head. Otherwise, she appeared to be in pretty good shape physically. She seemed a little confused.
Confused?
Well, Mr. Parrish said that she'd been napping at the time the car went off the road.
Did you ask her if she'd blacked out?
Yes, I asked both of them, and neither of them said she had. Mr. Parrish in particular seemed in a hurry to get on his way again. He insisted there was nothing wrong with her.
Did you examine her?
Yes, I did.
And what'd you find?
Well, other than a superficial head injury, there were no abnormal findings. The pulse and blood pressure were normal. I treated the head injury, bandaged it, and under the circumstances, there wasn't anything else I could do without making a more thorough examination, which at that time and that place was impossible.
Did you recommend that further examination should be made?
Yes, I did. I suggested to Mr. and Mrs. Parrish when they got to their destination that they call in another doctor, and I asked them if they'd like to follow me to my office and let me make a more adequate examination under better conditions. But Mr. Parrish insisted that they didn't have the time.
Did you recommend a follow-up examination later?
Yes, I did. Oh, the wound certainly appeared to be a superficial one. I felt observation would be wise.
But Mr. Parrish didn't want to take the time. He was in too big a hurry.
Well, not right then, at least. I felt he was making a mistake, but there wasn't anything I could do but warn him.
Now, Dr. Styner, you see the condition of Mrs. Parrish today. Can you account for its being related to either the injury or your treatment?
No, I can't. I find it very hard to explain in view of what my examination showed.
Although you insist that you warned both Mr. and Mrs. Parrish that further examination was advisable, don't you think it's strange that neither of them have any memory of it?
Well, it's not strange in Mrs. Parrish's case. She's rather confused about the whole accident.
What about Mr. Parrish?
I can't account for his lapse of memory.
Now, Dr. Styner, you testified that the patient actually had a serious injury to the head. Is that right?
A very superficial one. Yeah.
So you say. But isn't it true that a patient can sustain severe internal injuries without there being much sign of them on the surface?
Yes, that can happen.
Yes. So a patient could sustain a relatively minor cut on the head and yet receive a rather serious injury to the brain. Is that possible?
Well, under these circumstances...
All I asked you, is that possible?
Yes, it's possible.
Huh. Now, if there were a serious brain injury present, will you admit that it could result in the plaintiff's present condition?
Yes, it could.
That's all, thank you. But we have shown that the fault lies entirely with the physician, whose acts at best can be termed only negligent. The result of that negligence you see before you. A woman maimed and crippled for life. A woman who asked but little of life, and now much of what little she had has been taken away. The left leg that is forever locked into place. True, she can walk, if you want to call that walking. The left arm that is frozen into some grotesque, useless appendage that will hang from her shoulder until the day she dies. The usefulness of her left hand forever gone. The hand that once performed 1,000 womanly tasks so well. A hand that helped to make a home out of 4 walls and a roof. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this could happen to you, it could happen to the judge, it could happen to any of us. But it happened to Maud Parrish. Her very life has been despoiled. Now, if there were any room for doubt, but I say there is none. I say the facts are plain.
Oh, I might have known you'd pull off some stupid stunt like that. Just can't depend on you. You're just like your son. There's both of you are just exactly alike, the both of you. He thought I was fooling when I told him I was going to toss him out of the house.
Be as smug and as miserable and as frustrated and unhappy as you want to be.
If there are certain elements about a case such as this which are difficult to understand, there are numberless elements about the human body that are far more difficult to understand. Counsel for the plaintiff argued convincingly that the defendant was at fault. Counsel for the defense argued just as convincingly that he was not. Now only the jury can answer.
Mr. Foreman, have you reached your verdict?
We have, Your Honor. The jury finds for the plaintiff, Your Honor.
Oh, you don't want to talk about it. Well, that's just too bad. Maybe I do.
Well, I don't. You won your verdict. You've had things your own way. Now let's forget it once and for all.
Say, what are you trying to prove anyway? I don't like that kind of back talk, and you know it. I don't like it, and I won't take it. Not from you any more than I would from that son of yours. Not as long as I'm the head of this family, I won't. Back talk, that's all I ever heard from him.
I did see him.
Oh, what are you babbling about now? You saw who?
My son. Our son.
You saw him, knowing how I feel, after I gave you strict orders that you weren't to see him anymore?
I hadn't seen him for almost 5 years. Do you realize that? Almost 5 years. He was the same sweet boy. He's very happy. We had a wonderful visit. And I took a taxi cab back to the city. I remember. It was getting out of the taxi. I slipped and fell and hit my head on the curbstone. I hit it hard.
You lied to me. You said you didn't leave the hotel. You're a liar.
I did not lie to you, Richard. I was confused. I didn't remember. I did not lie. I think you had better go now alone. I have some things to do here.
On the basis of the statements made by the plaintiff, Mrs. Parrish, in the courtroom after the trial, and notwithstanding the verdict of the jury, the attorney for the defendant immediately moved to reverse the court's judgment and enter into the records that the judgment be in favor of the defendant. The motion to rule in favor of the defendant was granted. This particular case in point illustrates graphically that the relationship between physician and patient is a delicate one, and a degree of mutual understanding is absolutely essential for successful treatment, whatever the circumstances. Understanding and cooperation. Where these are present, medical treatment has a firm foundation. Where these are absent, the physician's hands are tied. With complete understanding, with the establishment of the basic doctor-patient relationship, the science of medicine may go forward to accomplish its primary purpose, healing the sick.